Quick test. When I show you this box art for Pokemon Ruby, what do you think of it? Besides nostalgia, it's probably something along the lines of, this looks like a very menacing Lego dinosaur, and that answer is absolutely accurate. This is Groudon, a legendary Pokemon that not only is the plot point of the game's story, but part of one of the best Pokemon generations of all time, Generation 3. Now let's look at the latest box art for one of the more recent Pokemon games, Pokemon Violet. This is opinionated, but to me this legendary motorcycle dog doesn't feel as powerful or mean, but on the other hand it seems fairly confident and strong. It would make for a fun build-up towards the end of the game, right? No. Almost immediately in the story, you find Miraidon sleeping on a beach and its only purpose is to steal sandwiches and star as your Uber ride throughout the majority of the plot in Pokemon Violet.
It's showtime!
Today we're going to see what's exactly going wrong with the current legendary Pokemon encounters and how to fix it. But first, let's put on our nostalgia goggles and take a look at what made old Pokemon legendaries so fun. One of my all-time favorite Pokemon games was Pokemon Diamond, and even though there was a lack of new Pokemon, the story and world felt so immersive and fun to adventure throughout. As soon as your journey takes you into Celestic Town for the first time, you could talk to the NPCs who would gossip about legendary Pokemon and their past history. In the middle of the city, you could see paintings of both legendary box art Pokemon Dialga and Palkia. Then if you ended up going even deeper into the Celestic Ruins, you would see 3 more paintings of the legendary Pokemon Azelf, Mesprit, and Uxie, who you would end up saving later in the story and being able to capture. Besides this town being the major location for some plot points in Diamond and Pearl's story, it helped set up the stage for some really immersive experiences. You felt like something big had already happened, and something bigger was being set up in the background with these legendary Pokemon. If you look back at older generations, you'll see a lot of similar immersive elements inside of towns and cities, like the entirety of Pseudopolis City, which has the Cave of Origin, or the burned-in Bell Towers in Ecruteak City. All of these examples set the stage for the player slowly starting to get hyped for the story's build-up, or even just rewarding the player for exploring and finding unique environments. Now let's fast forward to Pokemon Violet and Scarlet, the current most recent generation of Pokemon. I'm gonna be honest, I don't hate me, I actually like these games. But that's because I've been trained to love anything Nintendo related, even if it runs at 5 FPS. Putting that aside though, I respect that Game Freak is kind of trying new things like open world scenarios and letting players explore as they like. Also, to be clear, I don't even really have an issue with the new Pokemon designs. They really went on the silly fun side this time around. But throughout my multiple playthroughs, I noticed that not only did the world feel empty, it felt like I already explored everything after just a few hours of playing. There was no cool new place that made me wonder, hey, I bet a cool secret legendary Pokemon lives here. In the few instances where there were caves, it's stopped at just that, being a cave with nothing else. But this point has been overdone in a lot of other critique videos, so I'm not going to spend too much time repeating it. Now let's take a look at how you actually start the story. Game Freak removes the powerful legendary you get near the end of your journey moment by giving you the legendary at the beginning of the game. Now, I'm not opposed to change, and I think it's fine that they wanted to try something a little different, but the way the story is set up frames this legendary Pokemon as weak and underpowered, which, to be fair, is kind of the point of the main story. Miraidon and Koraidon are not as powerful as they used to be, so you need to bring them up to speed by defeating the Titans and feeding them mystical weed sandwiches. Miraidon does power up at the end of the game, but by this point you've already spent so much time with it, the all-powerful Pokemon moment is pretty mid at best. But not to worry, because in every Pokemon game there's going to be some exciting side quest legendary Pokemon for you to find. That's what you would have said a few generations ago, but Pokemon Scarlet and Violet decided to create some of the most boring, mundane, and unexciting tasks of all time for their side quest legendaries. Let's talk about the Treasures of Ruin, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's secret legendary Pokemon. To get these Pokemon, you have to pretty much do one thing: find and touch colored stakes around the open world. Then make your way to a random seal against a regular wall, and one of the Treasures of Ruin Pokemon will appear. You have to do this 4 times, and the only difference is the color of stakes and seal on the wall. There's not really any mystery, no build-up, or barely any lore hints towards these Pokemon, besides one school professor who tells you to go look for them. To be honest with you, it feels like they were just rushed into the game as an afterthought. Now, to give some credit where it's due, because I'm complaining too much, the designs for these legendaries are actually pretty cool. I mean, come on, look at this little firefish guy, isn't he the cutest? But after catching all 4 of these Pokemon, I didn't really feel that satisfied. the game didn't do a good job at building up or hyping these Pokemon at all like in previous games. Honestly, if Game Freak just gave these out as Terra Raid Pokemon, I wouldn't have felt any different than I do now. Don't get me wrong, I think handing out legendaries through mystery gifts and Terra Raids is fine, but there was just something really special about the way you stumbled across legendaries in previous games. Let's take the Reggie puzzle in Ruby and Sapphire for example. Sure, it was a little convoluted, but once you figured out the game was telling you what to do through Braille, it was so fun to figure out. Well, after I looked up the answers on GameFAQs forums. If we take a look at an even older example in the original Pokemon games Red and Blue, you find the legendary bird trio after doing some fairly simple puzzles, but they each still had their own unique locations. Moltres was behind a boulder puzzle in Victory Road, Articuno is at the bottom of the Seafoam Islands, and Zapdos is just chilling in a power plant. While these puzzles are about as simple as the Ruinous Stakes puzzles, each encounter still feels really unique and fun to traverse. Pokemon's biggest problem with legendary encounters all comes down to one larger issue at hand. Open world games are perfect for Pokemon, but they end up being plagued by barren wastelands with overused and non-unique assets. Don't get me wrong, it's completely unreasonable to expect every single art asset to be unique, and we don't want that. But it's pretty obvious in games like Sword and Shield where the polish went and where it didn't. I think in order to fix this, Game Freak really needs to scale down their worlds again to something that their team can handle, not only on Nintendo's hardware, but as a company. I don't think anyone would complain if the map of Paldea was half the size, but the quality and encounters for important key aspects like legendary Pokemon and story elements were drastically improved. Here, imagine if instead of pulling stakes out of your ass and then going up to a wall and waiting for a Pokemon to jump out of a mystical seal, you had the option to finally be allowed to enter those sealed off caverns after beating the Elite Four. It might be a little tedious to ascend further up the ruins, but maybe you need Miraidon to climb up a few walls or glide across a few gaps. But once you get to the top, the legendary Pokemon that was locked away from you the entire game is there waiting for you to challenge it. You might be thinking, hey, this sounds a little familiar. That's because I'm also describing the way you can catch Rayquaza in the Sky Pillar area in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. I love Pokemon as a franchise, and I don't think you can just brush everything off as, oh, well, I was a kid back then. I'm grown up now, so of course it's not the same. When the games have changed so much, legendary Pokemon are some of the coolest aspects of Pokemon games, and I still feel like I've had no reason to use the Master Ball I got on anything because nothing is deserving of it yet. Now, I know, a lot of players have voiced their concerns about Pokemon's new generations, and some of the critiques are a little unfair, but I really do hope that Nintendo and Game Freak will take some of these into consideration. Last year, the Pokemon Company was having discussions about how their hectic release schedule was a major contributor for the release quality of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. They explained that they were having more conversations about how to stay on schedule without sacrificing quality in the future. We'll have to see how they handle this going forward, and the fact that they're even acknowledging their shortcomings makes me a little more hopeful as a Pokemon fan. And if you think that's cope, let me tell you about how I'm 100% sure that we're gonna get a Black and White 2 remake this year. Thanks for watching! Oh, and leave a comment about how you feel about current Pokemon games. I'd be interested to see what you think.